What happens when we die? This is a question everybody asks at some point or another. We all know that at some point we are going to die. After all, the only guarantee in life is death. So, what happens when we die? Some people believe that when you die, that's just it. You don't exist anymore. Everything about you is just gone. Other people believe in something called reincarnation, that once you die, you come back as maybe another person or as another sort of animal, and that you just keep getting reincarnated. But neither of these are what we as Christians, as Catholics, believe. We don't believe that death is just the end, that after life there's just nothing. And we also don't believe that when we die we will come back as another person, as another animal or something like that. We believe that we are who we are. We are who God created us to be, and that's who we will always be. According to Catholic teaching, there are two ultimate destinations for human beings after death. One is what we call heaven. The other is what we call hell. Now, you probably have ideas in your head about what heaven and hell are, right? I mean, you've probably seen things with, heaven having a pearly gate and St. Peter's there kind of guarding it or letting people in, and maybe there are little fat baby angels flying around with harps. And hell, maybe you've seen pictures of hell with these demons with horns and tails and pitchforks, and they're just poking at you, and there's fire and all that sort of thing. But what do we really mean when we talk about heaven and hell? Well, let's start with heaven. Heaven is the continuation of, the fulfillment of, and the perfection of the relationship we've had with God here on earth. See, for those of us who've had a relationship with God, right? We've been praying, we've accepted God's grace. We've been to confession, all these things. We know God. For those of us who know God, that relationship with God doesn't end when we die. That relationship continues, and it becomes greater and deeper, and we experience the love of God in a way that we could only really imagine in this life. See, the scriptures tell us that in heaven we will see God face to face, or we will see God as God truly is. Here on earth we only see God like through a window that's dirty, and you can't really see through. You just look through and you can see, there might be a shape on the other side maybe moving around, but you can't see clearly. In heaven we see God clearly, as God truly is, in all of God's glory. So if heaven is being with God, in relationship with God, and with everybody else who is in relationship with God, then hell is the opposite of that. Hell is the continuation of not having a relationship with God in this life. I mean, think about it. If you're someone who has wanted nothing to do with God, if you're someone who has, turned your back completely on that and just said, I don't care about this God, I don't believe in this God, why would you then want to spend eternity, all of time, I mean even timelessness, why would you want to spend all of eternity with that God that you've denied, that God that you haven't had any sort of relationship with? I mean, for those who have had a relationship with God, entering heaven is the fulfillment of what has already been present, right? But if that hasn't already been present, then would that person even want to be with God in heaven? with a God that person doesn't even know. See, hell is separation from God. Those who have chosen to be separated from God in this life will continue to be separated from God in the next life. And we call that hell. We use imagery of fire and brimstone to explain what it must be like to be separated from God, because we know the light and the love and the mercy and the grace of what it means to be in relationship with God. So what would it mean to willingly reject that? Well, that is what we mean by hell. So after we die, we will either continue to have a relationship with God, or we will continue not to have a relationship with God. And we call those heaven and hell, respectively. But what about purgatory? Right? Maybe you've heard about purgatory, and maybe you think, oh, well, it's kind of this place in between heaven and hell where people go if God can't decide if they deserve to be in heaven or if they deserve to be in hell. Well, that's not what purgatory is. See, as I said at the beginning, there are only two ultimate destinations for human beings. Heaven, that is union with God, or hell, that is separation from God. So then how does purgatory fit in? Well, for those of us who are in a relationship with God, who will one day be in heaven and have that relationship perfected, there is a bit of a problem. See, all throughout the scriptures, we're told that none of us can see God and live. The reason being is that the glory and goodness and beauty of God is literally too much for us to handle. That if we have any sort of sin in us, we would just crumble at beholding the ultimate glory of who God truly is. But we also know that in heaven, we will see God as God truly is. Now, I don't know about you, but I can say pretty confidently that I am not yet perfect. I am struggling in this life to live a life of discipleship by following Jesus Christ, by being in relationship with God. And I think that categorizes pretty much every Christian who has ever lived. Maybe with a select few who did achieve perfection in this life with the help of the Holy Spirit and God's grace. But for the vast majority of us, when we die, we will not yet be perfect. And in order to enter heaven and to see God as God truly is, we will have to be perfect. So if we've been in relationship with God, if we are what the church calls in a state of grace, then God has another gift of grace to give us after we die. And that gift is what we call purgatory. Purgatory is a state of being whereby we are completely purified so that we can be enabled to enter heaven. We are perfected so that we can enter heaven. I mean, maybe you have a relationship with God, you're in a state of grace, but there's still a lot of anger you're carrying around, or maybe you still have some bad habits, or some sins that you fall into, and they aren't enough to completely sever that relationship with God, but they are keeping you from being perfect. They're keeping you from being able to truly behold God in all of God's glory. In purgatory, through an act of God's grace, God helps us get rid of those attachments, helps us get rid of those imperfections that are in us. I like to think of it like the dressing room before a wedding, right? When the bride puts on her dress, the groom puts on the tux and gets all dolled up and ready for the wedding feast. So if we're destined for heaven, it's likely that we'll be making a pit stop at purgatory. Whether it's a place, whether it's a state of being, we don't really know. We just know that through some act of God's grace, God purifies us after death and removes those impurities, those imperfections that we carried with us in this life to enable us to enter heaven and be in complete union with Him. So nobody will be in purgatory forever. In fact, there will be a time that nobody is in purgatory because everybody in purgatory has been purified and moved on to heaven. See, if you're in purgatory, it means that you are saved by the grace of Jesus Christ. Nobody would be in purgatory and then God decides, you know what? They're going to end up in hell anyway. No. Purgatory is kind of the step into heaven. So maybe you're thinking, why are we talking about all this? I mean, I'm a young person. I'm not worried about what's going to happen after death. I'll worry about that when I'm old and on my deathbed. Well, look, heaven and hell, like we said, are really continuations of the relationship we either have with God here or the relationship we don't have with God here. And a relationship isn't really something you can just manufacture in a day, right? Your best relationships are probably with the people you've known a long time, people who have been with you through difficult times and through joyful times. The life we're living here and now matters. It matters whether we have a relationship with God. It matters whether or not we are doing what we can to proclaim the love and mercy and justice of Jesus. And especially during this season of Lent, we're called to think about these things. We're called to remember that we won't live forever. That there will come a time when we die. And we need to be ready for that. Death isn't something we should fear. If we're in a relationship with God, if we're in a state of grace, then we know that relationship will continue after death. Now please read the material below and answer the reflection questions. Have a great week.